So I was recently chatting with this tech developer friend of mine in Shanghai. We were talking about a new app launch.
Okay.
And when I mentioned, the potential privacy concerns users in Europe might have, he didn't just disagree, he laughed.
He laughed.
Yeah, but it wasn't mean-spirited or anything. It was just this look of, genuine disbelief.
Yeah.
He looked at me and asked, honestly, why are Europeans so paranoid? Who has the time to care what I buy?
Wow.
He said, I'm just one person in a city of 25 million. And for him, the trade-off was just obvious that he gives up a little data, and in return, his life becomes totally seamless.
The convenience factor.
Exactly. But then my mind immediately jumped to my colleague back in Berlin. Now, this is a guy who uses a completely separate browser just for online banking. He physically tapes over his laptop camera.
Oh, yeah. I know the type.
And he speaks about data privacy with, the gravity of a fundamental human rights issue. So you have this fascinating disconnect, right? Neither of these men is ignorant. They're both intelligent, successful professionals looking at the exact same technology.
But seeing two completely different things.
Totally. Where one sees a tool of ultimate convenience and efficiency, the other sees a potential instrument of control. And this isn't just a difference of opinion. It feels more like a collision of two completely distinct operating systems for reality.
That's a great way to put it.
So it really forces us to ask, when a society prioritizes what you could call convenience collectivism over individual privacy, how does that rewrite the rules of the digital world? And I guess, why do China and Europe misunderstand each other so disastrously on this topic?
That's the core question, isn't it? And it all starts with the screen you're looking at.
That opening scenario, it just sets the stage for everything we're going to explore. We're about to do a deep dive into a stack of research that explains how this fundamental cultural software, the values, the language, the laws, how that dictates the hardware, or in this case, the digital interface. We're going to unpack this huge question by starting right there, with the screen itself. Because the way China's digital world functions, the actual user experience, the UX, it's fundamentally different from how it operates in the West. And that divergence is the bedrock for everything else.
Absolutely. If you really want to understand the difference in data philosophy, you have to look at how the digital ecosystems diverged over the past, 20 years?
It's been a while.
China's internet experience had a very different a really independent evolution. While, say, North America and Europe slowly transitioned from desktop PCs to mobile devices, China basically did what we call mobile leapfrogging.
They just jumped a whole step.
They jumped straight into a mobile-first reality. There wasn't that same long-term reliance on the fixed desktop web that we had.
And that independent path meant that the typical Western model, where you have all these specialized niche apps built to fit inside the existing Apple or Android ecosystems, that just didn't take hold in the same way.
It didn't. Instead, you had these incredibly powerful local players, especially companies like Tencent, who were able to step in and build their own functional philosophies, really from the ground up. And that led to a totally different kind of digital architecture.
The super app.
Precisely. The dominant architecture in China is the super app phenomenon. The digital sphere there has this strong, you could say, cultural preference for the everything in one model.
It's so true. Think about it. A Western user might have WhatsApp for messaging, Venmo, or PayPal for payments, Expedia for booking a trip.
And then a dozen little mini apps for shopping or getting a taxi.
Exactly. But in China, a company like WeChat just consolidates all of those functions. They integrate mini programs, payments, social life. It's all one seamless, comprehensive experience.
And that entire design philosophy prioritizes convenience, aggregation, and data consolidation. It's a stark contrast to what we tend to prefer, which is this unbundled minimalist approach.
And the moment you look at the interface, that divergence is it's glaring. It's right there in the aesthetics.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're a user who's used to the Western UX philosophy, whether that's in North America or Europe, you expect less is more. We tend to favor simplicity, clean aesthetics, getting rid of what we think are non-essential visual elements.
Lots of white space.
Maximizing white space, exactly. You see it in the simple, almost austere layout of Amazon's website or Google's homepage. That clean, restrained feel is often tied to cultural values that prize practicality and order, avoiding distraction.
Yet when you engage with the Chinese digital space, you get the exact opposite. You get the more is more maximalist aesthetic.
It is so dense.
These interfaces are dense. You're seeing packed pages, really dense information architecture, vivid graphics, saturated color schemes, scrolling banners that are constantly advertising deals.
And multiple calls to action, right? All competing for your attention on a single screen.
Right. When you look at an e-commerce platform like Taobao, the sheer visual density can be, well, it can be really overwhelming to a Western eye.
It's funny because if that aesthetic were deployed in a Western context, users would just call it cluttered and confusing. So here's the crucial question. Why don't Chinese users see it as chaotic? Why do they, in fact, seem to equate this visual richness with engagement and efficient information processing?
And this is where we have to connect the digital design directly to the foundational linguistic engine.
The language itself.
Yes. The density works because of the nature of the Chinese written language. Unlike Western alphabetic scripts, Chinese uses these complex characters logograms, which contain a wealth of information and numerous strokes all within a very small square space.
Okay, so when I'm reading English, my brain is processing strings of individual letters that form words. And we need that white space between words and sentences to avoid visual fatigue.
Exactly. But for a Chinese user, a high information density on a screen is seen locally as a really efficient use of digital real estate. Because each logogram carries so much meaning, it's essentially a compacted piece of data. The eye is highly skilled at rapid visual scanning.
So you don't read character by character in the same way you read letter by letter.
You don't. And this allows the interface design, despite all its visual complexity, to function extremely efficiently for the native user. They are culturally and linguistically geared toward comprehensive, detailed information delivered in a very dense format.
That is a fascinating link. The physical mechanics of the language are actually dictating the digital design preference.
Yes.
It's catering to a cultural preference for just comprehensiveness. Instead of wanting a minimalist path to an answer, the user expects to see all the options, all the deals, all the information laid out for them immediately.
And on top of that, you have to account for that rapid move to a mobile-first environment. With such high mobile penetration, designers had to optimize for what's called thumb-driven design.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means elements like consistent app-like navigation bars get pushed to the bottom of the screen. The whole experience is optimized for quick, one-handed navigation and, well, for consumption of all that dense information.
And we can't forget the device ecosystem, right? I remember historically, China's Android environment was super diverse and fragmented.
Highly fragmented. You had so many different device manufacturers running their own customized versions of the operating system.
So that technological fragmentation, that must have created a powerful demand for consistent, seamless user experiences across all those different devices.
It did. And that's a role the highly integrated super apps were perfectly positioned to fill. They provided a unified user environment, really regardless of the underlying hardware.
So this whole more is more philosophy, it's not just a design preference. It sounds like it's a technological, linguistic, and practical necessity. It drove a system that's all about comprehensive data aggregation and ultimate convenience.
That's it. And once you accept that all your digital life is going to flow through just a handful of integrated super apps that collect comprehensive data, well, you naturally start asking different philosophical questions about who should be the steward of that data.
That is the perfect transition. The design is really a symptom of a profound difference in societal values. We're moving from the screen to the cultural core. If the West is characterized by individualism, the primacy of the individual and their rights, what defines the philosophical operating system in China?
It's defined by collectivism. Culturally, the system operates on a framework where individuals primarily identify as part of a group, their family, their community, or the state.
The group comes first.
The group comes first. And crucially, the group's well-being and stability are prioritized over the interests of any single individual. The consequence of that for data policy is pretty clear. Public interests inherently tend to outweigh individual privacy.
So sacrificing a personal interest, like giving up some control over your data for, say, greater public safety or convenience.
That's often seen as a virtue. It's not seen as a compromise in the same way.
And tied directly into that collectivistic structure is a concept I know we've talked about before, high-power distance. This comes from Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory.
Right. High-power distance refers to the degree to which an unequal distribution of power is accepted and even expected within a culture.
Okay, so In a low-power distance culture, like Germany, for example, authority has to constantly justify itself and its actions to the public.
Constantly. But in high-power distance cultures, like China, the power structure is more readily accepted. There's an inherent trust that those in authority are acting to determine what is good for the collective.
So how does that translate practically into data governance? Because for listeners in low-power distance cultures, it might seem really counterintuitive to just trust massive institutions with sweeping data collection powers.
Well, think of it this way. If you trust the steward, you trust the system. In a high-power distance collectivistic system, there's a fundamental belief that the government and large organizations are pursuing long-term collective benefits, things like national stability, economic progress, public order. That acceptance means people tend to place significantly greater trust in data collected by these entities because the power structure's legitimacy isn't constantly being questioned, at least not in the context of stability.
And this high level of acceptance and trust, it goes deeper than what people might just say in a survey or a questionnaire. The research we reviewed on implicit political trust is genuinely illuminating on this.
It's absolutely striking. Researchers use these automatic response tests to measure the public's immediate sort of intuitive orientation toward the regime. This is what we call implicit trust.
So it's your gut reaction, not your thought-out answer.
Exactly. And they found that the Chinese public holds a widespread, automatic, positive, implicit trust in government, which is generally measured as being even stronger than their explicit, self-reported trust.
And the numbers?
The numbers showed that about 83.7% of respondents demonstrated this positive implicit trust.
Wow. Over 83% possessing an automatic, gut-level positive orientation toward the governing structure. That is a profoundly stable foundation for digital governance.
And it matters because that implicit trust translates directly into practical support for the system. Studies show that higher implicit trust actively predicts support for what's called system justification.
Which means endorsing the existing social, economic, and political status quo?
Right. And it also predicts robust support for large-scale initiatives like the social credit system. This suggests that the positive orientation towards the regime is deeply genuine and automatic, and it helps explain why these large-scale collective data initiatives are not just tolerated, but are often actively supported by the population.
Given that implicit trust, it becomes so much easier to understand the crucial difference in how they define what exactly they're trying to protect. We have to talk about the privacy definition divide.
Yes. In the West, particularly since the GDPR came into effect in Europe, privacy is enshrined as a fundamental human right.
And it's also viewed as a property right. My ability to control, own, and transfer my own information. It's a very broad, very encompassing definition.
It is. Now contrast that with the Chinese cultural and legal view. Privacy, or Yin-si, is defined much more narrowly. The term is often intertwined with concepts of shameful secrets, or personal tranquility or dignity. It's reserved for truly sensitive matters.
So what's the key distinction then? What counts as Yin-si versus just information?
That's it. General personal information, things like your browsing history, your age, your home address, your purchase history, that does not receive the same high level of legal and cultural protection as Yin-si.
And Yin-si would cover?
Extremely sensitive data, things like medical records, your sexual history, private family matters, information that could lead to public shaming or a loss of dignity.
So, okay, let's take an example. If I use a ride-hailing app, my precise location data and my payment history, that's considered personal information, not Yin-si. So if I were in Europe, my ability to control that location data would be a fundamental right because it's my property.
How is it viewed in China?
Well, because it falls outside that narrow definition of Yin-si, the collection of that personal information is largely accepted, especially if it serves a collective or public good.
Like what?
For instance, the data collected by a ride-hailing app is used for safety reasons, to resolve consumer service disputes, and to improve traffic flow, all of which are perceived as public benefits.
So consumers there generally don't view that type of data collection as a privacy violation.
Not in the same way, no. It's because of the overriding collective cultural norms and that limited scope of the Yin-si definition. Now, the Personal Information Protection Law, or PIPL, it certainly regulates the usage of general personal information, but its focus is more on regulating the circumstances and legality of its use, rather than granting the individual absolute control or ownership over it. That makes perfect sense. If the culture is collectivistic, and the populace grants this deep, implicit trust to the governing structure, then the rules they put in place, the laws will be designed to reinforce that architecture.
Exactly.
So let's move into that regulatory landscape, specifically how China is governing data for what it sees as collective welfare.
When China introduced the Personal Information Protection Law, the PIPL, back in 2021, there was immediate global attention and lots of comparison to Europe's GDPR. And on the surface, you can see why there are strong structural similarities.
The PIPL certainly follows the GDPR blueprint in some ways. It imposes strict requirements on data processors, and it implements some really severe penalties for noncompliance.
Oh, the fines are significant. Up to 50 million RMB, or 5% of a company's annual revenue. It is absolutely not a toothless law.
But the core difference is, as we've been saying, it's philosophical and structural, and it's revealed in the law's stated priorities.
Yes, this is the key. GDPR is fundamentally based on basic human rights and individual autonomy. The PIPL, however, explicitly lists its goals in a very specific order. National security first, then societal interests, and then finally, individual interests.
That order, it changes everything. If national security is prioritized first, the state has built-in mechanisms to override individual concerns whenever a conflict arises.
Precisely. PIPL provides specific legal exceptions for processing data. Processing is allowed where it's necessary for performing a statutory responsibility or obligation or responding to a public health emergency.
Acting in the public interest, like for news reporting.
Right, or for the performance of a contract. These are broad allowances that make it legally straightforward for the state to pursue data aggregation for collective benefit, especially in areas deemed vital for stability and public health.
And while PIPL does guarantee individual rights, like the right to access your data, correct it, portability, and even a conditional right to deletion, those conditions are exceptionally important for understanding how the system really works.
They are. The right to deletion, for example, is not absolute.
What does that mean?
Deletion is only required if the purpose for processing the data has been achieved, or if consent is withdrawn, or if the processing violates the law. But critically, if data storage is mandated by another law, or if the deletion is deemed technically difficult,
then what happens?
Then the processor is only required to stop using the personal information. But data retention can, and often does, continue. The law is designed to ensure the integrity and retention of data that's considered necessary for the state's functioning.
The power and the intent of this regulatory rigor were put on this vivid, very public display with a massive penalty imposed on the ride-hailing giant Didi in 2022. I mean, this case is essential for understanding PIPL enforcement.
The fine was historic. $2.77 billion. And this wasn't viewed as a punishment of innovation. It was seen as a stringent enforcement of the cybersecurity law, the data security law, and PIPL, all aimed specifically at protecting national data security and public interests.
The state was sending a signal.
A very clear signal that no corporation is too big to undermine the systemic integrity of data governance.
So let's break down the specific violations, because the list is long and pretty instructive. Didi was cited for excessive collection. What exactly were they collecting beyond what you'd need for hailing a car?
It was an astonishing amount. They were cited for collecting 8.3 billion pieces of clipboard and application list information from users' phones.
So what I copy and paste and what other apps I have on my phone?
Yes. They also collected facial recognition data, precise location data, and home and work addresses, all of it deemed well beyond the scope necessary to achieve their business objectives. This violated the principle of necessity and minimization that's laid out in PIPL Article 5.
Right. I mean, why does a ride-hailing app need to regularly read your phone's clipboard data? It just doesn't.
It doesn't.
And that data minimization principle is something shared with the GDPR, but the penalty here was just astronomical. What made this case so severe?
And this is where that high-power distance culture comes right back into play. While the data collection was a serious violation in itself, a key factor driving the severity of that $2.77 billion penalty was Didi's documented failure to comply with the supervising department's requirements.
And its perceived malicious evasion of supervision.
That's the one.
So that's the cultural failure, right? Not respecting the authority.
Exactly. In this high-power distance environment, failing to respect or actively defying the authority of the supervising government department is seen as an extremely grave offense. It's not just a commercial violation. It's seen as a threat to the systemic order and integrity.
So the stringent enforcement just underscores the government's absolute determination to regulate private entities that endanger national security and public data integrity.
And it prioritizes the stability of the entire digital ecosystem way above a single company's commercial interests.
So the DD case serves as this powerful message. The laws prioritize the security of the nation and the integrity of the data ecosystem, and noncompliance with authority will be met with maximum force. This environment of foundational collective order and trust is what facilitates the widespread and rapid adoption of advanced digital technologies like facial recognition.
It is.
So let's turn our attention to that application layer advanced technology adoption, specifically facial recognition technology, or FRT. In many Western contexts, the introduction of FRT is met with immediate suspicion, usually about state surveillance. But in China, the drivers of adoption are completely different, and it's led to really high public acceptance.
The difference really stems from a societal consensus that's driven by convenience. FRT is widely appreciated by the public when it provides a demonstrable increase in both convenience and security at the same time.
So the accepted public narrative is that this tech makes life easier, faster, and safer all at once.
That's the narrative. And you see it played out in daily life. I mean, think about commercial payments faster. Cashless transactions via a facial scan are now ubiquitous.
Or, maybe more significantly, skipping those long security queues at metros, train stations, and airports. Security checks are already a common expectation in public transport systems. So if FRT can make those necessary checks quicker and more thorough,
then it's framed as a clear, immediate public good that saves time for millions of people every single day.
The foundation for this widespread application was laid pretty early on, wasn't it?
It was. Pioneers like Tang Xiao, who studied at MIT, came back and established companies like SenseTime. After their breakthrough in 2014, when they surpassed human-level facial verification accuracy, the technology was ready for a mass national rollout, and this was strongly supported by state security directives focused explicitly on improving public safety and modernizing security systems across the nation.
What's truly fascinating to me is how the public debate sustains this positive narrative by strategically channeling criticism.
How do you mean?
Well, it seems that public challenges to FRT are significantly more likely to occur when the technology is deployed by for-profit companies in intrusive ways that don't offer a corresponding increase in security or convenience.
Ah, right. This is the state positioning itself as the effective social protector against commercial data collection abuses.
Exactly. We saw this in that highly publicized case where a law professor, Guo Bing, successfully sued the Hangzhou Wildlife Park.
Right, because the park had started requiring facial recognition for access, replacing his less intrusive fingerprint system, and the court ruled in his favor.
And the commentary around that ruling was overwhelmingly positive from citizens. They saw the court as enforcing consumer protection against an unnecessary private data grab.
And you see the same dynamic with the annual state-sponsored 315 evening party expose.
Right.
It serves the exact same purpose. It publicly shames prominent international brands like Kohler and Max Mara for non-consensual collection of facial data in their retail stores.
It's a masterful strategy, really. By directing public attention and criticism toward private commercial abuses, the state implicitly legitimizes its own use of the technology.
It reinforces the idea that the state is the ethical, responsible actor whose primary motivation is collective security and public welfare.
While private entities are the greedy actors who must be regulated, it just strengthens that implicit trust we discussed earlier.
It does, and that consensus was absolutely crucial during periods of crisis, for instance, with the adoption of massive public systems like the health code, the Jiankangma.
That system, which assigned a risk assessment based on your travel history and location during the pandemic, it became essentially mandatory for accessing public life.
And it was widely accepted because it represented the highest form of convenience collectivism. It was basically applying the everything-in-one super app approach to a public health crisis. The overriding societal consensus prioritized collective welfare and community stability over individual control of location and travel data.
So finally, let's tie all of this back to the ultimate example of state-led digital governance, the social credit system, or SES. When you view it through this lens of high implicit trust and collective stability, the SES is perceived far differently than it's often portrayed in the West.
It is vital to first define the SES accurately. It's not a single monolithic numerical score assigned to every citizen. That's a common misconception.
Right, it's more of an aggregate system.
It's an aggregate system collecting public and market credit information. And it's used to measure compliance with laws, regulations, and contracts across various domains. It's fundamentally about creating a framework for trustworthiness, both in the marketplace and in public life.
And the explicit goals are all centered on that idea of the greater good. promoting honest dealings, national stability, societal improvement, need for the sake of creating a safe and orderly society for everyone.
And PIPL has explicitly created the legal space for the SCS to operate. The law permits data processing for performing a statutory responsibility or obligation, which directly covers the public credit information system.
But it's not a free-for-all.
Not at all. To ensure fairness, PIPL's Article 24 requires transparency, fairness, and justice when automatic decision-making is used, like placing an individual or a company on a defaulters list. This ensures that even this high-level system operates within a legal framework that's designed to support national stability and societal improvement. It is, from that perspective, a system designed for collective advancement.
This has been a true deep dive. It feels like we've really gotten to the core of these two fundamentally divergent digital operating systems. To synthesize our findings, I think we can see clearly now why the man in Shanghai laughed at the European paranoia.
I think so. We've established that the divergence in the user experience, that more is more approach, is directly linked to foundational cultural and technological factors. The logogrammatic language sort of necessitates efficient information density, and the mobile-first environment demanded those integrated super apps.
So the design choice optimizes for comprehensive data and user satisfaction by making information processing incredibly efficient for the user.
And that efficient design rests on that cultural bedrock we've been talking about, a strong collective identity, high power distance, and the resulting high implicit trust in the governing structure.
And that trust is automatic and it's genuine. It translates directly into popular support for these large-scale digital initiatives focused on security, stability, and public welfare, like the health code and the FRT deployments.
And finally, we see that while Europe is seeking a secure digital ecosystem that's focused on individual rights through GDPR, China's model driven by PIPL's explicit priorities of national security and societal interests operates in a world where convenience collectivism is the accepted operating principle.
And the extremely strict enforcement actions like that massive DD case, they just emphasize that private interests must always defer to the sovereign necessity of protecting national data security and maintaining public welfare.
It's all about ensuring a stable and orderly environment for all citizens to flourish.